in the pantheon of mystery and detective writers. Dashiell Hammet's place is near the head. Among American practitioners, only Edgar Allan Poe stands before him, and only Raymond Chandler stays beside him. Dashiell Hammett cleared the way for a generation of writers because he introduced into an effete prescribed genre the vigor of the street and the tension of contemporary problems. Dashiell Hammett was born May 27, 1894, in St. Mary's County, Maryland. At age 19, he enlists in the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. In 1921, Hammett leaves the Pinkertons disgusted with the agency's role in strike breaking. In 1923, he publishes his first short story in the Smart Set magazine. In 1927, he releases the first of 4 parts that would later be collected and novelized into his first full-length work, Red Harvest. Over the next few years, Hammett goes on to author The Dane Curse, The Maltese Falcon, The Glass Key, and The Thin Man. After the release of The Thin Man, his most commercially successful work, Hammett mainly works in Hollywood, either writing and working on Thin Man scripts or working in the radio business. During World War II, he works as a newspaper editor while stationed in the Aleutian Islands. In 1951, Dashiell Hammett is jailed for his role in the Civil Rights Congress, which was considered a communist organization during the McCarthy era. The purpose of the CRC was to provide legal representation for impoverished, marginalized groups, mainly African Americans, notably the Martinsville Seven. Hammett was also very careful not to let his leftist political ideologies and political views bleed into his fiction. Dashiell Hammett was one of the originators of the hard-boiled style of detective fiction, and paved the way in the genre through his experimental usage of first-person narration, terse sentence structure, and natural dialogue patterns. These tenets of form would provide the backbone for detective fiction in America, influencing authors such as Raymond Chandler, author of The Long Kiss Goodnight, who is considered to be Hammett's spiritual successor in the genre, and British author John le Carre, author of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, who is considered the champion of espionage-driven mystery novels. The effect of John le Carre's novels, as opposed to, say, Sir Ian Fleming's James Bond series, was that le Carre's adherence to the manipulative, indirect procedure of mystery fiction, first established in Hammett's later work, was in direct contrast with James Bond's bold shooting and schmoozing tactics. Another distinguishing characteristic of Hammett's novels and his detectives, as opposed to, say, Poe's C. Auguste Dupin or Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot, was that they were never, the cases weren't ever clean. They were never one peg into one hole. Everything gets neatly tied up at the end. The bad guys in Hammett's novels certainly weren't an orangutan like in Poe's Murders on the Rue Morgue, and the cases aren't neatly tied up in the last couple of pages of the novel like Agatha Christie novel ever. At his heart as a writer, Hammett was a satirist, a wry observer of the follies of men, women, and society. His early works, short stories published in magazines such as Black Mask or The Smart Set, are fraught with pretense, pomposity, arrogance, conceit, and vanity wrapped in naivete. Hammett's leading men, namely the Continental Op, viewed the world with a harsh cynicism crusted over after years of disillusionment with the world's morals. This grim outlook was forged during Hammett's time with Pinkertons, where he saw that most crimes were really committed by people just trying to get by. People made desperate by circumstance, or people at the other end of the social spectrum, who have compromised their humanity in clawing their way to the top so that they would never stop at anything to preserve their holdings. In his 1950 essay, The Simple Art of Murder, Raymond Chandler states that Hammett was the first American writer to use the detective story for the purposes of a major novel, to present a vision, blazing if disenchanted, of our lives. Hammett took murder out of the Venetian vase and dropped it into the alley. It doesn't have to stay there forever, but it looked like a good idea to get as far away as possible from Emily Poe's idea of how a well-bred debutante gnaws a chicken wing. Like Hemingway in his prose, or William Carlos Williams with his poetry, Hammett focused his attention on the specifics of the American language. Chandler continues to say that Hammett had style, but his audience didn't know it. Because it was in a language not supposed to be capable of such refinements. They thought they were getting a good, meaty melodrama written in the kind of lingo that they imagined they spoke themselves. It was, in a sense, but it was much more than that. He was spare, frugal, hard-boiled, but he did over and over again what only the best writers can ever do at all. He wrote scenes that seemed never to have been written before. Hammett gave murder back to the kind of people that commit it for reasons, not just to provide a corpse. And with the means at hand, not with hand-wrought dueling pistols, Ferrari, or tropical fish. He put these people down on paper as they were, and he made them talk and think in a language they customarily used for these purposes. The most fascinating thing about Hammett's characters is their descriptions. As you'll see in the representative example, we only get narration from the first-person perspective of the Continental Op in The Red Harvest, Sam Spade, Maltese Falcon, what have you. And it's through their description of people, of settings, that we, the reader, glean the story. It's the only way that we get it. And it's done in the common vernacular of the people of the time. And the reader is able to identify with it in a much clearer and adhesive way than through most other first-person narrations, and certainly more than a third-person narration. So for the representative example of Dashiell Hammet's writing style, I'm going to start with just the opening about page of his original novel, The Red Harvest. I first heard Personville called Poisonville by a red-haired mucker named Hickey Dewey in the big ship in Butte. He also called his shirt a shoit. I didn't think anything of what he had done to the city's name. Later, I heard men who could manage their R's give it the same pronunciation. I still didn't see anything in it but the meaningless sort of humor that used to make Richardsonary the thieves' word for dictionary. A few years later, I went to Personville and learned better. Using one of the phones in the station, I called the Herald, asked for Donald Wilson, and told him I had arrived. "Will you come to my house at 10 this evening?" He had a pleasantly crisp voice. "It's 2101 Mountain Boulevard. Take a Broadway car, get off at Laurel Avenue, and walk 2 blocks west." I promised to do that. Then I rode to the Great Western Hotel, dumped my bags, and went to look out at the city. The city wasn't pretty. Most of the builders had gone in for gaudiness. Maybe they'd been successful at first. Since then, the smelters, whose brick stacks stuck up tall against a gloomy mountain to the south, had yellow smoked everything into uniform dinginess. The result was an ugly city of 40,000 people, set in an ugly notch between 2 ugly mountains, that had been all dirtied up by mining. Spread over this was a grimy sky that looked as if it had come out of the smelter's stacks. The first policeman I saw needed a shave. The second had a couple of buttons off the shabby uniform. The third stood in the center of the city's main intersection, Broad and Union Street, directing traffic with a cigar in the corner of his mouth. After that, I stopped checking them up. At 9:30, I caught a Broadway car and followed the directions Donald Wilson had given me. They brought me to a house set in the hedge grass plot on a corner. The maid who opened up the door told me Mr. Wilson was not home. While I was explaining to her that I had an appointment with him, a slender blonde woman of something less than 30 in green crepe came to the door. When she smiled, her blue eyes didn't lose their stoniness. I repeated my explanation to her. My husband isn't in right now. A barely noticeable accent slurred her S's. But if he's expecting you, he'll probably be home shortly. She took me upstairs to a room on the Laurel Avenue side of the house, a brown and red room with a lot of books in it. We sat in leather chairs, half facing each other, half facing a burning coal grate, and she set about learning my business with her husband. Do you live in Personville? She asked first. No, San Francisco. But this isn't your first visit? Yes. Really? How do you like our city? I haven't seen enough of it to know. That was a lie. I had. We got in only this afternoon. From the onset of the novel, Hammett makes sure that we get good characterization of not only the small characters that we see through Mrs. Wilson's stony eyes and the police officers with their unshaven faces and shabby uniforms, but he makes specific notice to pay attention to the setting. Personville is described as dirty, ugly, dingy, and as the novel progresses, we can only see how seedy this town is, how poisonous Personville really is. And we get all this purely from the narration of the Continental Op. It's common vernacular, and it's a way of writing that hadn't really been seen before to this degree. It takes the fun action of a detective novel, which in America had been around since 1841 with Poe, but it makes it fun. It makes it dangerous. We don't know enough about Dashiell Hammet. He seems to kind of get forgotten in the undertow of genre fiction with detective work. Raymond Chandler is usually given the title of the best to have done it in America, but without Dashiell Hammet, Raymond Chandler would be nowhere. And in that essay, The Simple Art of Murder, Raymond Chandler makes specific note of Hammet's contributions to American literature.